On a cold, biting winter day, in a small, forgotten corner of Wyoming, a single dad was just trying to make it through. His world had been reduced to the simple necessities: survival, love for his son, and the quiet strength to keep going. But one fateful moment would shift everything, sending ripples through his life that no one, least of all him, could have ever predicted. It started with a set of tiny footprints, leading onto a frozen lake. But when they didn't return, the reality of what was happening hit him like a thunderclap. Without a second thought, he rushed toward the lake's edge, where a freezing wind howled and the snow piled high. What he found beneath the ice would change everything for him, and for two little girls who had no one left to turn to. In the days that followed, a miracle unfolded, a story of kindness, courage, and a second chance at life, one that would prove that even in the hardest of times, acts of kindness can change everything. This is the incredible story of a man who didn't just save two children. He saved a family and, in the process, rediscovered the power of human connection. Join us on this journey of hope, resilience, and love as we share a story that will touch your heart and remind you that no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. Welcome to Acts of Kindness Stories. In the heart of winter, Jack Hawthorne had learned to live a quiet, solitary life. He didn't need much, just enough to get by. His small farmhouse stood at the edge of a vast, snow-covered Wyoming plain, surrounded by the silence of the wilderness. Inside, the warmth of his stove was the only thing keeping the bitter cold from seeping in. As a single father, Jack had found a rhythm in life, one that centered around his son Charlie and the chores that filled their days. The weight of grief had grown lighter over time, but the loneliness remained a quiet companion. That morning, Jack had been stirring a pot of venison stew, the smell mingling with the icy air outside. He barely noticed when Charlie stomped inside, shaking off the snow from his boots. But when Charlie spoke, his voice carried an edge of urgency. "Dad," Charlie said, breathless, "I saw something weird by the lake. Footprints. Little ones. They went out onto the ice but didn't come back." Jack's heart stopped for a beat. It wasn't like Charlie to get worked up over something so small. Jack set the spoon down and grabbed his coat. His instinct kicked in without hesitation. "Show me," Jack said. Charlie led him to the lake, just behind the barn. The snow was falling heavily, but the tracks were clear, two sets of tiny footprints leading onto the ice. No signs of animals. No adult tracks. Just children. Jack's mind raced. The ice was still thin. Too thin for anyone to be out there, especially children. "Stay here," Jack told Charlie, though he knew it was a lie. There was no staying behind. The moment Jack saw those tracks, he knew what had to be done. He ran, each step heavy with the weight of the situation. The ice groaned under him, cracking in places. Jack didn't waste time calculating risks. He had no choice but to act. The wind howled around him, the cold biting into his skin. And then, through the roar of the storm, he heard it, a faint, muffled cry. It was the unmistakable sound of a child, desperate and afraid, trapped beneath the ice. Without a second thought, Jack dropped to his knees, pressing his ear to the ice. He heard the cry again, clearer this time. He couldn't waste another second. Jack raised his elbow and slammed it into the surface of the ice. Once, until the ice shattered with a deafening crack. Freezing water surged up around him, pulling at his legs, but Jack didn't hesitate. He plunged his arms into the icy depths, searching blindly, his fingers numb and desperate. He found them. Two little girls, eyes wide in terror, trapped beneath the thick, unforgiving ice. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he reached for them. The cold gnawed at him, but there was no time to feel it. He pulled one girl free, then the other. He dragged them to the edge of the lake, his body shaking uncontrollably from the cold. But still he refused to let go. By the time paramedics arrived, Jack was slumped over, exhausted, his body freezing, but the girls were alive. They were safe. They had made it. In the sterile warmth of the hospital, Jack sat by the girl's bedside, his own son Charlie beside him. Jack had one hand wrapped around his son's small, trembling one. Charlie didn't ask many questions, but his eyes were full of them. "Are they going to be okay?" Charlie asked softly, his voice thick with worry. Jack looked through the small window where the doctors were tending to the girls. Their skin was pale, their coats threadbare, showing signs of frostbite, but they were alive. "I think so," Jack answered, his voice quiet but firm. "They're safe now." But even as Jack breathed a sigh of relief, another question lingered in the air. Who were they? Where had they come from? And why was no one looking for them? The girls hadn't said much, only that their names were Rosie and Willa. When asked about their parents, Rosie had whispered that their mother was crying somewhere in the trees. The hospital staff had no answers, and neither did Jack. That night Jack couldn't sleep. His mind kept racing. Didn't make sense. Two little girls, alone on a frozen lake, with no one to look for them. Jack couldn't stop thinking about the moment he'd found them. He stood by the window of his farmhouse, looking out toward the lake. The storm had passed, but the questions still remained. His son, Charlie, was asleep on the couch, curled under a blanket. Jack hadn't slept in days, not really. The only thing that kept him going was the girls. They had survived against all odds. And that was something, at least. At 4:12 a.m., Jack gave up pretending to sleep. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his coat, and walked out into the cold. The air bit at his skin, and the sky was black with no stars. The lake stretched out in the distance, still covered in snow. Behind him, the farmhouse stood quiet, save for the occasional creak of wood. He was looking for answers that didn't come easily. His eyes scanned the trees, but there was no sign of anyone. The girls hadn't spoken much, only that their mother had sent them to run toward the lake. Jack had no idea where she was, or why she had sent them alone. But he knew one thing. The girls had been through something terrible, and he couldn't turn his back on them now. The next morning, Jack made his way into town. He stopped by the sheriff's office to report the girls. The deputy, a young guy who seemed more interested in his phone than the case, barely gave Jack a second glance. "We'll put out a bulletin," the deputy said. "See if anyone's reported them missing." Jack didn't wait for more. The deputy's indifference grated against him. He knew what had happened wasn't just a simple case of lost children. Something had happened to these girls. And their mother had been hiding, running, for reasons Jack couldn't yet understand. Back at the farm, the girls were playing with Charlie. Their laughter filled the farmhouse, a sound Jack hadn't heard in years. Charlie was different with them, gentler, more expressive. He had always been a quiet boy, but something about the girls seemed to wake something in him. Jack stood by the barn doorway, arms crossed, watching them. Felt like a dream, a new beginning. But that didn't change the lingering questions. Just after sundown, Jack saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. His heart skipped a beat. He froze, recognizing the figure as a woman, stumbling toward the farmhouse, her clothes torn, face streaked with cold and tears. Her hair was matted and wild, but her eyes, they were filled with fear, exhaustion, and something else, shame. Jack stepped forward cautiously, a mixture of relief and concern flooding him. She was real. She wasn't just a ghost of Jack's imagination. She was here. The woman's name was Eliza Monroe. She had been the girl's mother, hiding, running, for reasons Jack couldn't yet fathom. But when she saw her daughters safe and warm in Jack's care, all the tension, all the fear melted from her. She crumbled, falling to her knees to hold them close, whispering apologies, her hands trembling as she touched their faces. The reunion was tender, raw, and full of emotion. In the days that followed, Jack and Eliza spent hours talking, sharing pieces of their lives. Pieces that had been broken, pieces that had been lost along the way. Eliza shared the truth of why she had left everything behind. She had married a man who had seemed perfect on the outside, but inside he was broken. After his death, things had only gotten worse. Her husband's business partner had started threatening her, trying to take custody of her girls. Fearing for their safety, Eliza had run, taking her children with her. Eliza had tried to keep them safe, but the fear had driven her to make some hard decisions. Sending them toward the lake that day was one of the hardest things she had ever done. She thought someone would find them. She didn't think it would be Jack, but he had. And he had saved them. The following days brought a quiet peace to the farmhouse. Eliza, once afraid to trust, began to open up. She saw in Jack someone who had lived through his own pain and wasn't afraid to face the unknown. She saw in the children a future, one that they would create together, not as strangers but as a family. But peace wouldn't last forever. Eliza's past was never far behind. One morning as Jack was working outside, a convoy of 10 luxury SUVs pulled up to the farmhouse. Jack saw them approach, men in black coats walking with purpose. They were there for Eliza, and they weren't just friends. They were sent to take her and her daughters back to the life she had run from. But this time, Eliza wasn't going anywhere. She had found something worth fighting for. Jack had stood by her, and together they would stand their ground. In that moment, as the luxury SUVs sat idle outside, Jack knew something had changed. The life they were building now was theirs, and no one could take that from them. As the days passed, Jack and Eliza began to truly build something together. The haven they created, not just for themselves but for others, became a sanctuary of healing. The old barn, once a symbol of hardship, transformed into a place filled with hope, laughter, and new beginnings. The children, once lost and unsure of their future, now ran freely, their joy a constant reminder of the power of second chances. Eliza found herself leading the way, not as a corporate figure, but as a mother and a woman determined to make a difference. Jack, with his steady hands and quiet strength, stood beside her, showing that it wasn't just the grand gestures that matter, but the small, everyday acts of love and care. The haven, as they called it, wasn't just a physical space. It was a testament to the power of kindness, resilience, and the courage to start over. It was proof that no matter how broken things might seem, there's always a chance for healing, for growth, and for building something new together. And so, in the quiet of the snow-covered fields, with the warmth of family around them, they knew this was only the beginning. Together, they had created something that would last, a place where kindness and love could bloom, even in the harshest winters. If this story inspired you, touched your heart, or made you believe that kindness can change lives, consider sharing it with others. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Join us on this journey of hope, healing, and second chances by subscribing to Acts of Kindness Stories. Help us reach 10,000 subscribers so we can continue to share stories that inspire and remind us all of the power of compassion. Thank you for being a part of this incredible journey.